Before Washington, D.C. ever existed, there was Georgetown, not the polished neighborhood of cobblestone streets and boutique shops we recognize today, but a raw, bustling port town founded in 1751. Here, on the bend of the Potomac, muddy docks stretched into the river. Tobacco warehouses loomed over the shoreline, while merchant ships from the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa crowded its waters. It was a town older, wealthier, and more powerful than the capital it would one day serve. But as Washington rose, Georgetown's influence slowly faded, its legacy buried beneath marble monuments and national myths. The year was 1751. Long before Washington, long before the grand vision of a federal capital, the British Crown authorized the founding of a small but ambitious town on the banks of the Potomac River, Georgetown. The choice of location was no accident. The Potomac's sharp bend near what we know today as M Street offered a natural harbor, deep enough to welcome ocean-going ships yet sheltered from storms and currents. In the 18th century, rivers were the arteries of commerce, carrying goods, people, and power. For colonial leaders, this bend in the Potomac was priceless, and Georgetown was destined to thrive. Almost immediately, the town became a hub of trade. Tobacco ruled the Chesapeake. It was more than a crop. It was currency, the foundation of fortunes, and the driving force of colonial society. Farmers from as far as Frederick and beyond loaded their wagons with massive barrels, rolling them for days down rutted dirt roads until they reached Georgetown's docks. There, enslaved laborers and dockhands packed the tobacco into ships bound for London and beyond. But Georgetown's trade did not end with tobacco. Soon, flour from the fertile Piedmont, rum and molasses from the Caribbean, and cloth and tools from Europe filled the market stalls. And tragically, alongside this wealth came the forced trade in enslaved Africans, whose bodies and labor underpinned the prosperity of the town. This dark commerce left scars that remain part of Georgetown's legacy today. The physical shape of Georgetown reflected its colonial ambition. A tidy grid of streets climbed the hillside, linking warehouses to taverns and family homes. Wooden docks reached like fingers into the Potomac, where ships creaked against their moorings. The taverns that lined Water Street hummed with life. Sailors boasting of storms at sea, planters bargaining over prices, and merchants scribbling figures by candlelight. In the shadows, enslaved workers hauled cargo, mended sails, and loaded barrels late into the night. Wealthy traders lived in brick townhouses overlooking the river, their fortunes tied to the commerce below. The contrast between wealth and hardship was etched into the very fabric of the town. By the middle of the 18th century, Georgetown was no longer just a dot on a map. It was a booming frontier port, pulsing with ambition, money, and energy. This was Georgetown before Washington. Raw, unpolished, and already on the rise. By the late 1700s, Georgetown had transformed into more than a trading post. It was a seat of influence, a place where wealth translated into power, and where decisions made in smoky taverns could ripple across the colonies. The merchants who controlled its docks became kingmakers. Tobacco and flour profits filled their ledgers, and with money came leverage. They financed infrastructure, funded local politics, and wielded outsized influence in shaping the future of the region. Virginia planters and Maryland farmers flocked to Georgetown, not only to sell their crops, but also to secure credit, negotiate contracts, and court favor with the town's elite. Local leaders debated grievances with the crown in dimly lit rooms, fueled by strong drink and stronger ambition. Georgetown was also a cultural crossroads. Ships arriving from abroad brought more than cargo. They carried people. Germans, Irish, and Scots made Georgetown their new home, bringing their trades, faiths, and traditions. Enslaved Africans endured brutal labor at the docks and in households, while free black artisans carved out spaces of independence, skillfully working as blacksmiths, carpenters, and seamstresses. The market buzzed with voices speaking in multiple accents and tongues. Yet beneath this vibrant mix lay a deep and painful inequality. The prosperity of the few was built on the unacknowledged suffering of many. Its geography magnified its role. Perched on the Potomac, Georgetown sat at the midpoint between northern commerce and southern agriculture. Traders from Philadelphia negotiated here. Planters from Virginia arrived with cargo. Diplomats from abroad docked their ships to meet with power brokers. In many ways, Georgetown was not just a town. It was a stage where early American politics, commerce, and culture collided. The taverns, too, became legendary. Here, politics mingled with trade. Planters might argue tariffs while sailors sang shanties in the corner. Behind closed doors, merchants whispered about rebellion, independence, and opportunity. These conversations foreshadowed the upheaval that would reshape America. In Georgetown's rise, we see a mirror of the nation itself. Ambitious, diverse, prosperous, and deeply contradictory. It was confident in its power, proud of its status, and few could have imagined that this independent powerhouse would one day be absorbed by a city not yet born. The year 1790 marked a turning point in Georgetown's destiny. With the Compromise of 1790, national leaders chose to build a brand new federal capital on the banks of the Potomac. For Georgetown's merchants, this seemed like a golden opportunity. Surely they believed their thriving port would become the natural anchor of the new capital. They had the docks, the warehouses, the markets, and the wealth. Washington City was only a plan on parchment. Georgetown was already alive and prosperous. But that optimism would not last. The new capital was not designed to grow around Georgetown. It was designed to eclipse it. Pierre-Charles L'Enfant's sweeping vision for Washington included broad avenues radiating from the capital, ceremonial spaces, and monumental architecture. It was a plan of grandeur, ambition, and symbolic power, a city meant to reflect the strength of a new nation. Compared to this vision, Georgetown's crowded streets and working docks seemed small and provincial. As federal buildings rose and offices relocated, the flow of power shifted eastward. Congress met in Washington. Diplomats and bureaucrats took up residence there. Money followed influence, and Georgetown, once the center of trade and negotiation, found itself on the margins. The town did not give up easily. Its leaders poured resources into infrastructure, most notably the construction of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, meant to tie Georgetown to the riches of the western frontier. Merchants lobbied Congress, insisting their port was indispensable. They tried to assert independence, hoping to remain the commercial lifeline of the capital region. But the tide of history was relentless. The federal city's symbolic weight, combined with the deliberate investment in Washington's development, gradually overshadowed Georgetown's efforts. To the world, Washington became the city of the future. Georgetown began to look like the past. By the mid-19th century, Georgetown was formally annexed into the District of Columbia. Its status as an independent powerhouse evaporated. Once the beating heart of trade and politics, Georgetown had become just another neighborhood, its story buried beneath the marble, avenues, and monuments of Washington's rise. Today, when we think of Washington, D.C., we see marble domes gleaming in the sunlight, the White House standing as a symbol of power, and the wide green expanse of the National Mall stretching between monuments. But few realize that before all of this grandeur, there was Georgetown. Long before Washington became the heart of a nation, Georgetown was the pulse of the Potomac. And yet, while its influence has faded from memory, the traces of its past still linger. The neat colonial grid of streets, first laid down in 1751, continues to shape the neighborhood. Walk along M Street or Wisconsin Avenue, and you're following the same paths merchants and sailors once traveled. The Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, once envisioned as a vital artery to connect inland farmers with coastal markets, still runs quietly through the heart of Georgetown, a reminder of ambition, commerce, and the relentless drive to connect a young nation. Historic taverns, many with low ceilings and weathered wooden beams, still stand as silent witnesses. Within their walls, men once debated independence, bargained over crops, and forged the personal alliances that helped set the stage for a revolution. The cobblestones beneath your feet once carried barrels of tobacco, sacks of flour, and crates of imported goods. Even the waterfront, though transformed by time, still whispers of the days when tall ships crowded its docks and commerce filled the air. Georgetown's legacy is not just architectural, it is cultural and political. The spirit of negotiation, the blending of diverse peoples, and the ambition that once defined the port, city, helped shape the character of Washington itself. Without Georgetown's foundations, its wealth, its commerce, its contradictions, Washington's story would have unfolded very differently. Yet history books often pass over Georgetown, focusing instead on Washington's grandeur. This silence is telling. History is not only about what happened, but also about what we choose to remember. Georgetown's eclipse reflects how power can redefine memory, how the victors of history decide which stories to elevate and which to let fade. Rediscovering Georgetown matters because it forces us to look deeper. America's capital was not created in isolation. It was built on ambition, fueled by inequality, and sustained by resilience. Beneath the marble and monuments lies a port town whose name deserves to be remembered. A reminder that every great city rests on forgotten foundations. Before Washington, D.C. ever existed, there was Georgetown. Not the polished neighborhood of cobblestone streets and boutique shops we recognize today, but a raw, bustling port town founded in 1751. Here, on the bend of the Potomac, muddy docks stretched into the river. Tobacco warehouses loomed over the shoreline, while merchant ships from the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa crowded its waters. It was a town older, wealthier, and more powerful than the capital it would one day serve. But as Washington rose, Georgetown's influence slowly faded, its legacy buried beneath marble monuments and national myths.